welcome to the second hour of KCDC. Excuse me. With me on set, former Chief Nominations Counsel of the U.S. Senate, Greg Nunziata, NBC News Capitol Hill reporter, Leanne Caldwell, and joining us from Miami, the president and CEO of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor, Maria Teresa Kumar. Greg, I want to start with you because you have worked with the man that we just saw, Mitch McConnell, whose laughter is, you know, man has a sense of humor that people might not actually realize. But how much damage was done this week to the Senate and to the process? You know, for our viewers who haven't seen you on our previous weeks, you had stewarded this process for the Judiciary Committee in past years. Yeah,
I mean, I think a lot of damage was done. It's the anger that folks saw at home wasn't just for the cameras. I mean, senators are personally angry with each other about how this was handled. It was not handled the way allegations are normally handled. So it was a divisive few weeks for the Senate. Yeah. All
right, the dramatic scene that unfolded in the Capitol as the Senate voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh marked a chilling crescendo to one of the most intensely bitter and partisan fights that the chamber has seen in quite some time.
Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. Sergeant at Arms has restored order in the galleries.
As the Daily Beast's Sam Stein put it, those screams from the protesters seemed primal. These last 20 days have really felt like one long primal scream, one that's revealed even deeper fissures in Congress and across our political landscape. As the Washington Post's Michael Scherer and Robert Costa note, quote, even top Republicans were downbeat on Saturday afternoon as the vote neared, cognizant of the cost of the political and cultural reckoning that has been sparked alongside the confirmation process. And that sentiment was echoed by Susan Collins in her floor speech Friday. And it's really the one thing, the only thing, senators on both sides of the aisle have been able to agree on through this entire process.
We live in a time of such great disunity as the bitter fight over this nomination both in the Senate and among the public clearly demonstrates. It is not merely a case of differing groups having different opinions. It is a case of people bearing extreme ill will toward those who disagree with them.
Leanne, you and I have been up on Capitol Hill covering this day in and day out the last 20 days. And I mean, one thing that became very clear to me, and this was clear to me even before Dr. Blasey Ford came forward when this fight was about other things, the way that the protesters approached Susan Collins in particular, but also Republicans across the board, showing up at their houses, it really caused them to dig in into the positions that they held. But on the flip side, you know, I've never seen protests that were so personal and emotional, people actually standing outside offices and telling deeply personal and intimate stories about their own lives.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And they were numerous. They were there on a daily basis. They were committed. But you talked about digging in, and I think that's absolutely what happened. It became a partisan thing as well. The protesters were the left, right? And the right, the Republicans, didn't necessarily pay much attention to the protesters. But as far as the mood on Capitol Hill, I mean, we talked to senators throughout the week who said that they've never seen it this bad, even some of these longtime senators. And even after Kavanaugh was confirmed on Saturday, people were leaving the Senate chamber. You know, the Republicans were happy, but still there was this solemn feeling. You know, Jeff Flake said rock bottom. All of them had very similar sentiments, and how it repairs itself is still unclear.
Greg, how much of this falls at the feet of Senator McConnell? I mean, he has a reputation as being, you know, and Paul Kane said it earlier in the show, that all he wants to do is win.
Well, he certainly had a priority placed on the judiciary and judicial issues going back for decades. This whole story is one that goes back for decades. Certainly, McConnell took a strong position on not filling the vacancy that arose during the Obama presidency,
which he calls his greatest achievement so far.
But that's not the beginning of this, right? I mean, Republicans will tell the stories going back to Bork, who's the seat that Kavanaugh is filling now was once supposed to be Bork's seat. right. So, yeah, I mean, McConnell's been part of this fight, but so has Schumer, going back through the Bush years and some really nasty judicial confirmation fights. And it's not exactly a straight line, but it trends down. I mean, it just keeps getting worse and worse.
Yeah. Maria Teresa Kumar, I want to get your take on McConnell's analysis of how this has affected his landscape politically. He's called the protesters a mob, and he says that, that's essentially created an enemy that has animated his base in a way that he wasn't able to do himself. What's your take on how those displays, fit into what Democrats are trying to accomplish this midterm?
Well, I think actually labeling these individuals, that many of them were survivors, coming forward as a mob and not actually listening to their voices, plays into what a lot of the progressive movement believes, is that the Republicans are basically are helping incite a cultural war. I think the challenge that Mitch McConnell faces is that you're going to stir up as many of his base as you're going to stir up folks that have been maybe independent but feel uncomfortable with the way the tone is. And I have to say, I used to work on Capitol Hill. I have never seen anything like it, and it is a sad day when you can't have even the folks that are voting in someone into the top judiciary, into the top office of the Supreme Court, and feel at least something that it was functional. And I think that was what was the real underlying problem on this, Casey, is that it didn't seem functional. It didn't seem like we were transparent. It wasn't like there was an honest dialogue of what was happening. The fact that Kavanaugh was sworn in, and even the people that were swearing him in didn't feel elated. I mean, there was obviously a group of us, but they felt like almost like they didn't do their job, and I think it's something that people should take seriously.
Leanne Caldwell, do you think that the 1 week period while we were waiting for the FBI investigation, how do you think that ultimately tilted this process?
I think it went two ways. I think Jeff Flake and Senator Chris Coons, they tried to save the process with this FBI investigation. But when the FBI investigation came out, it was such a partisan response to it. Democrats thought it was a sham investigation. Republicans used it as an opportunity to say that there was no corroboration. And I almost think that it harmed the process anymore. I think that it gave Republicans like Susan Collins and Jeff Flake an opportunity to vote for Kavanaugh. But as far as the committee in the Senate is concerned, I don't think that it did anything to improve it.
Greg, you've seen a lot of these background investigations behind the scenes. What's your take on whether this was legitimate?
I think it was an ordinary supplemental background investigation. I think Democrats got what they were asking for and are disappointed now that it wasn't more than what they were asking for. I mean, there was a reason that Senator Schumer and Senator Feinstein, when they were demanding this supplemental investigation, kept saying it will only take a few days. I mean, that is what a supplemental investigation is. They go out and interview a few people to complete the file, and I think that's what happened here.
Yeah.
So.
Maria Teresa, what's your take on how the investigation, or I know Democrats are arguing that it wasn't actually an investigation, and how ultimately it turned the process?
Well, if you recall, one of the second people that came forward was Diane Ramirez, and she herself said, I'm open to have a conversation with the FBI. Please interview me. That never took place. And I think it was the fact that that a lot of the folks that were accusing Kavanaugh of basically these acts, it was not a comprehensive review. And that and the way the information, the FBI investigative report was distributed, the senators had to stand in a room and basically rip off the report and share page by page. It wasn't widely reviewed in a way that most normally would be bound and given to every senator so that they can actually look at it at their leisure. So the process didn't have to stink, but it did because they basically created obstacles that were unnecessary.
All right, when we continue tonight, the president relishes victory, but who stands to gain the most from Kavanaugh's confirmation? I'm joined by Mississippi Senate candidate Mike Espy. The first, women were front and center as the Kavanaugh vote came down to the wire. We're going to talk about their historic roles when KCDC continues.
People that spoke to me most, really in the strongest of terms, in his favor were women. Women were outraged at what happened to Brett Kavanaugh. Outraged. And I think that's a total misnomer because the women, I feel, were in many ways stronger than the men in his favor. So you have a lot of women that are extremely happy, a tremendous number of women, because they're thinking of their sons, they're thinking of their husbands and their brothers and their uncles and others.
President Trump has praised Susan Collins' speech and vote over and over again, saying she's gotten an unbelievable level of respect. But Senator Lisa Murkowski is another story.
Even when one side of this chamber is absolutely dead set on defeating his nomination from the very get-go, before he was even named, even in these situations, the standard is that a judge must act at all times in a manner that promotes public confidence in the independence, integrity, and partiality of the judiciary, and shall avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety. And after the hearing that we all watched last Thursday, it became clear to me, or was becoming clearer, that that appearance of impropriety has become unavoidable.
In a time with plenty of outbursts in the Senate chamber, there was no one there to applaud her speech. And the president told the Washington Post, quote, "I think Murkowski will never recover from this. I think the people from Alaska will never forgive her for what she did." So, Leanne, let's walk through all the ways in which Lisa Murkowski all the lessons that she's learned about how much she does or doesn't need the Republican Party. Because this is a person who was abandoned by her leadership after she lost a primary in 2010 at the height of the Tea Party, proceeded to say, fine, you go do your own thing. I'm going to launch a writing campaign, teach people how to spell my name, and she won.
I think the difference between Lisa Murkowski's floor speech and the optics of Susan Collins' floor speech said everything. The Republicans were right behind Susan Collins' floor speech. They even placed 2 Republican women right behind her to give the optics of all these Republican women.
Solidarity.
Yes. Lisa Murkowski's floor speech, the chamber was empty. But like you said, she has proven that she has not needed the party to win. Alaska is a fiercely independent state. She also won her 2016 re-election campaign with a broad coalition. It wasn't the Trump base. She won with women. She won with men. She won with a broad coalition of voters. She's done it before.
Yeah. Greg, what's your sense of how the Republican conference is going to react to Lisa Murkowski?
I think she's been a valuable member of the party for a long time, but she's a very much an independent voice. I mean, even her take on Kavanaugh was very unique. I mean, she asserted that she was sure he was a good man and didn't believe, suggested she didn't believe the allegations, but she was upset with how this process has gone and thought that brought the court into disrespect, so she couldn't vote yes.
It's certainly, I thought because Leanne, she kind of tried to not focus on Dr. Blasey Ford, even though that was at the forefront of her own thinking. I mean, the day before she made this decision, she had been meeting with sexual assault survivors in her office. Alaska has the highest rate of sexual assault and rape of any state in the country.
I think it's really interesting, the difference between Collins and Murkowski, and I hate to always clump them together, but they are good friends, but they do represent 2 completely different states, and they're 2 different women. I was talking to a former Murkowski aide shortly after she announced that she was going to vote against Kavanaugh, and he said that Murkowski has always taken great pride in representing women and Republican women, and that is something that she has done throughout her career. Susan Collins, when you ask her similar questions, has a different take. She says, yes, I am a woman, but I am a senator too. And she doesn't view her role the same way that Murkowski does from a gender perspective.
That's really interesting. Susan Glasser writes also in The New Yorker about Sally Quinn, who is a former Washington Post reporter and longtime person here in Washington. And she said that Senator John Tower attempted to rape her in the backseat of a taxi after a dinner date when she was 20 years old. When Tower was later up for defense secretary under President George H.W. Bush, Quinn refused to talk to the FBI, who came to interview her about the incident. She didn't think anyone would believe her story, and she had no corroboration. She told Glasser that the night before Dr. Blasey Ford's testimony that she could have been Anita Hill, but she didn't want to be, and that nothing has changed since then. Glasser writes, quote, I called Quinn back on Thursday evening after a tumultuous week when it was already clear that the tumult would likely not change the outcome of Kavanaugh's lifetime appointment. Quinn said that she believed Ford had been telling the truth, but that it would not matter. Bottom line, she said, civic duty or no, it's just not worth it. Maria Teresa Kumar, what's your response to that? I mean, is the message that's been sent here that it's still just not worth it for women to come forward?
No, I think if anything, the opposite. I think the fact that we were able to get 2 women that protested Flake at the elevator bank, telling him to really reconsider, and he basically went back and had a conversation with Coons and basically promoted and encouraged that final FBI investigation demonstrates that we have to be at the front lines. That what folks want to do is what a lot of elected officials want us to do is basically to turn off and turn away so that they can basically not function in an open and transparent democracy. It should be the actually opposite. We should continue encouraging people to come forward, to be courageous, and we need our leadership to ensure that they are actually paying attention and have a spine. I think what, if anything, with the vote that we saw was Markowski was incredibly courageous. She was brave. She went against her party because she was representing the people of Alaska.
And we'll see. I'm interested to see if some Democrats reward her for that when she's back up for re-election again. Some Democrats, meanwhile, are publicly acknowledging that Dr. Blasey Ford and Deborah Ramirez's accusations could have had greater effect if not for one factor: attorney Michael Avenatti, the attorney who initially gained notoriety representing Stormy Daniels and who is now eyeing a run for the White House. He entered the fray days after Dr. Ford went public. Avenatti revealed his client, Julie Swetnick's accusations against that included Kavanaugh being present at parties that featured gang rape and spiked drinks. While Kavanaugh vehemently denied those claims, Republicans slammed them and took issue with Avenatti's involvement.
I think this process changed dramatically when Mr. Avenatti entered the picture. I think a lot of people, including many of my Democratic colleagues, felt like then at that point we had gotten into the foothills of preposterous.
And it seems Democrats like Senator Chris Coons are conceding that he may have done more harm than good.
Well, I certainly like Senator Kennedy's turns of phrase. The foothills of the preposterous is going to end up being a memorable phrase. I do think that he's correct that there was a widespread response, certainly on the Republican side, that these were not credible allegations.
Avenatti is still standing by his involvement. Here is what he told me last week when I pressed him on this point and asked whether Swetnick might have been better served by a different lawyer.
As it relates to my client came to me because I am a very good lawyer, and I represent my clients, and I do a very good job, as evidenced by the last 18 years of trial practice and the work that I've done for Stormy Daniels. I've done an exceptional job.
So I also want to raise, we just have a tweet from Michael Avenatti about an hour ago. I think we have it. We can put it up on the screen. He says he's quoting Cory Booker, who says in Iowa, "I have nothing personal against this president. If he wants to attack me personally, he can." Michael Avenatti taking Cory Booker to task over this. I have a lot of respect for Cory Booker, but we have different views about how to solve the crisis of Donald Trump and the dumpster fire of his presidency. And these hashtags are Fire with Fire, Hit Harder, and Fight Club. So it seems like we're off to the races in the Democratic primary, first of all, Leanne. But second of all, I mean, I asked him that question last week because that's what I was hearing from Democrats on the Hill,
right,
that Michael Avenatti's involvement made this more partisan, made it worse.
He did not like that question either. But so when Christine Blasey Ford first came out and then the Ramirez claims came out, Democrats were trying extremely hard to not make this look political. Republicans were charging that this was all politics. The timing, they questioned all of it, and then when Avenatti stormed in, it made it look very political, and that is the exact opposite thing that Democrats wanted from the optics perspective.
Right, and Republicans, obviously. I mean, Greg, what's your view of how that Avenatti's involvement impacted this process?
Oh, it absolutely changed, helped turn it around for the nominee. I mean, I think it started out in Republicans' minds that all the Democrats were virtually all the Democrats were lined up against Kavanaugh before Ford or any of this stuff came out, right? And his hearings were very contentious. Democratic senators were suggesting he was lying. We had that weird line of questioning from Kamala Harris about whether he talked to people at a law firm.
And the protests that disrupted it at the beginning.
So the Ford stuff seemed credible. There was a pause, but there was that background. And then by the time we got to Avenatti, the Ford story kind of sunk into all that other partisan noise. Yeah.
Yeah. Maria Teresa, what's your take on Avenatti? Do the Democrats this time around need somebody who's going to play a little bit more the way Donald Trump works?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's Avenatti 2020. I think that's clear. He knows that Cory Booker is doing his rounds and wants to basically be the nominee, and Avenatti saying, I'll take the gloves off. It's going to be an incredibly crowded field, as you know, Casey, and Avenatti, I think, is going to be on one end where people are going to fill in between, and it'll be interesting if the American public really wants constant shouting at each other between the presidential Trump and the nominee on the Democratic Party. I actually think that people want the temperature to be a little bit toned down and actually have thoughtful analysis, but we'll see.
If you thought 2016 was exhausting, just wait. And
Grab the
now,
popcorn.
exactly, for something completely different and some breaking news for all of you at home, pop star Taylor Swift has made a political announcement. She has announced on her Instagram she is endorsing 2 Democrats, former Tennessee Governor Phil Bredesen for the U.S. Senate and Congressman Jim Cooper for re-election to his seat. She said this of Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn, saying, quote, "Her voting record in Congress appalls and terrifies me. Congresswoman Bredesen has since tweeted his thanks." You guys took out the shake it off pun. That's sad. I liked that. All right. When we come back, Mississippi is as dark red as it gets. But is there a chance it could follow Alabama? We're going to talk to former Congressman Mike Espy, who faces an uphill climb as he runs for Senate. And if you ever missed the show, don't worry. KCDC is now available as a podcast. You can still hear the best highlights from the broadcast, our biggest interviews, breaking news, and analysis. You can find it on any app you use to access podcasts. Thanks very much for being on the program.
Hello, Casey. Good evening. I'm sorry we can't produce that lightning bolt that you're used to.
I will keep that in mind. We'll try and bring it back for your next appearance.
Next time.
I want to ask you first, you have said that you're going to be a no on Judge Kavanaugh, or if you were in the Senate, you would have been voting no. This is something that, Republicans have basically crowed about as, leading them to much greater returns, I suppose, on the Senate map.
Yes.
Do you think that this is going to be a defining issue in your race? And did you think about announcing that, or did you ever consider supporting Kavanaugh?
Well, I mean, I did say that, but I want to qualify it if you'll allow me to.
Okay.
I'm running for the Senate. I'm not there yet. So I was not privy to that confidential FBI report that all senators read on a confidential basis. So I was not able to read who corroborated what Dr. Ford said. But I based my answer on what I had seen. And what I saw, like most Americans, on that riveting testimony of Dr. Ford, I really saw her, give a searing rendition of what she believed had happened to her. And it was searing, and I believed it, and I thought it was incredibly credible. On the other hand, I saw, Justice Kavanaugh, and I believe that he treated himself, I came off as more of a victim. So I think that someone running for the highest court in the land, for a lifetime appointment, that FBI investigation should have been more thorough. And I'm sorry that it wasn't. But on that basis alone, I said that if I had been there in the Senate, I would have been a probable no. I said that, but it's qualified based on what was in the report. Which I didn't read, of course.
Do you think you might have been a yes if you had read the report and concluded, as many Republicans did, that there was no corroborating evidence for Dr. Ford's claims?
Well, I mean, I always like to make judgments based on facts. So had I been in the Senate, I certainly would have been very interested to read that and would have drawn a conclusion based on what I had read. So the only thing I have now is to base my conclusion on what I saw as an ordinary citizen, which is Dr. Ford's testimony, which I thought was serious and credible, and the fact that the FBI did not interview her, right? And I read that she supplied other names of those who could serve as corroborating witnesses.
Yes.
And they weren't interviewed, and then they did not interview Judge Kavanaugh. So that's why I said probable no.
How do you feel this issue has impacted your state as you have been campaigning and talking to constituents? Is this something that has broken through and you think is going to make a big difference in your race or not?
I don't believe it will at all. It's been a couple of days since that testimony, and we've not seen any perceptible change in polling or attitudes. I've been all over the state of Mississippi, counties, rallies, and over the weekend, and people just really care about rural hospitals closing, about the brain drain, about, you know, health care, and all the issues that touch and concern them much more than this. So of course, this is a serious issue, but for me and my race, I don't think that it's going to be that impactful at all.
What do you, I think there are a lot of people who are surprised that this is a competitive race. There's not generally the perception that Mississippi is ever in play on the Senate map, at least. What is your explanation for why this is happening? Is it about the president or is it about something else?
No, it's about me. It's about me. I'm a native Mississippian.
Perhaps that question was too easy for you.
Well, it's the truth. You know, he's the president of the United States, and he can go anywhere he chooses to go, and, you know, he came to Mississippi, and that's great. But I'm not running against President Trump. I'm running for the U.S. Senate, and I served as a member of Congress for 6 years, elected to a 4th term. I served everyone regardless of race or party or gender or religion. You know, I was a representative for everyone, and everyone here knows that. I served as Secretary of Agriculture, so whether you're a white farmer, a black farmer, a white rural resident, or a black rural resident, you were concerned about the rural hospitals closing. You're concerned about rural hospitals and rural water and rural sewer, and it didn't matter what race or what party. And people also know here that early on, when Haley Barbour, you know, a quintessential Republican, was running for re-election as governor, I stood up and I endorsed him in public. And it was done, I think, at the right time for the right reason, because it was right after Hurricane Katrina had devastated Mississippi. And I said then, in 2007, I didn't know I'd be running for any office, but I said 2007, he's the right person at this time for Mississippi because Hurricane Katrina had devastated our state. He was in the office with the Rolodex and the network to bring greater rehabilitation to Mississippi. That's why I did it. Yeah. So people know I will work across the aisle. I'll work with everyone, regardless of race and party, to lift our state, to improve our education, to improve our health care, and improve our education, and improve economic development. And they know that. That's why I'm leading in the race today.
All right. Well, Haley Barbour, certainly a friend of this show here at KCDC. Mike Espy, thank you so much for your time tonight. We're going to be watching your race very closely.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. When we come back, brand new reporting from Ali Vitale on the growing Trump family business, campaign trail surrogate. Her one-on-one interview with Donald Trump Jr. up next. President Trump will be campaigning across the country this week as the midterms near. But one of the most in-demand surrogates is actually his son, Donald Trump Jr., who has been traveling the country speaking at Republican rallies in some of the most critical races.
But, you know, I'm here to help the people that we've had good relationships with. We're out there fighting for the people who've been there and who've supported my father. And when you look at it, there's not a single economic metric where we are not better off today than we were 2 years ago. Not one. It doesn't exist.
NBC News' Ali Vitale caught up with Donald Trump Jr. on the trail, and she joins us now. Ali, it's great to have you here on set. Your reporting on these midterm elections has been great. Thank you. I want to start, though, on this point, not with the political side of this, but rather the fact that Donald Trump Jr., frankly, is under a cloud of legal suspicion and with the Mueller investigation. Do we know whether or not he's spoken to Mueller?
We don't, but so when you ask him about the Russia investigation, he really does give you this sense that maybe we care about it in Washington, but voters don't necessarily. Actually, take a look at what he had to say to me about that when I asked him that very question.
But when you're out here on the campaign trail and you talk about this, what's the reaction that you guys get?
Honestly, no one has asked about this in 2 years because everyone's known it was nonsense. It was a big catalyst because the media needed it to be true. They needed something out there to be able to say, okay, this is why Trump won.
And truly, when I talk to voters and I ask them about Russia, the ones who support Trump are keeping up with it because they feel like it's just another reason that someone's trying to get him out of office. And Democrats, of course, are keeping up with it because they feel like, of course, something's going on in the White House that they should be apprised of. But none of them are saying that this is the issue I'm voting on. So I think that there's something to be said for when Don Jr. says no one's paying attention to it. I mean, Mueller is paying attention to it, but voters might not necessarily be.
Sure. Well, and I'm sure that obviously the family has been kind of ramping up his legal defense as well.
Yeah.
Do any of the candidates that he's out there campaigning for seem concerned about it, or not really?
No, not really. And when you listen to them, I followed them to Montana, and then I was with him in Texas. So in the Tester race and then the Ted Cruz race, right? And both of those candidates were happy to have him out there. The crowd loved having him there. You ask voters, who are you here for? And it was kind of a split. Some of them were there for Ted Cruz or Matt Rosendale. A lot of them were like, I'm here for Don Jr. If I can't get the president, who's the next best thing? His son, right? And so Matt Rosendale actually said to me that he was ecstatic to have Donald Trump Jr. out there because this is the kind of thing that pumps up the crowd. And when you're looking at, can I get the Trump base to turn out, which for so many of these Republicans, especially running statewide, that's what they think is going to be the magic formula is, sure, Democrats are energized, but I have the Trump base. And look, we can get them out too, as long as Trump can come out here. Matt Rosendale actually said something just like that. Take a look.
What do you think had Donald Trump Jr. out there for you? It's fabulous. It's fabulous to have so much support from the White House, from the president, from his son. It's really been great. It brings energy to the entire state. It's an honor for me as a candidate to have it. Very excited. This is energy. This is a riled up, charged up Republican Party.
So, yeah, Casey, they're not paying attention to Russia. They're looking for someone who's going to rally the Trump base.
Yeah, Greg, what's your take on the Trump family and the long-term kind of state of the Republican Party? Because it does seem as though, I mean, I suppose if Mueller actually finds something, we won't be hearing as much from Don Jr. in the future. But he does seem to be setting up to try and follow in his father's footsteps in a way.
Well, I think Don Jr. has maybe even a deeper rooting in the Republican Party than his father does. I mean, he's been talking about some Republican policy issues for years before his father really firmly aligned himself with the Republican Party. So with Don Jr., I think you get both the energy of the Trump brand, but also some kind of someone who seems to have been committed to some causes that Republican voters care about. So I think he has, in the family, has the most kind of star power.
That is really interesting. I would not have thought that. Ali Vitale, thank you so much. Great reporting as always. When we come back, last week we heard Elizabeth Warren saying she'd consider running for president when the midterms are said and done. In just a moment, Mike Memoli joins us with brand new reporting on Kamala Harris on the trail in Ohio. That's next on KCDC.
I want to ask you a question straight out, flat out. I want you to give me the honest answer.
Are you considering running for president in 2020?
I'm not thinking about running for president.
Well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no clue. Well, I've been traveling around the country raising money for Democrats.
I'm going to do all I can to win my seat first, have a baby on November 4th.
People want a fighter, and people want somebody that can actually beat Donald Trump.
Sir, I can't imagine how you might accidentally end up in New Hampshire. How many months out from the 2020 primary are we?
If you can't beat Donald Trump, you go home.
Are you ruling out running for president in 2020 or not?
No, that's another year.
I don't know. I'm not ruling it out.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
We've got a great run of some of our favorite KCTC segments here this evening. Democratic Senator from California, Kamala Harris, just happened to be in Ohio today to speak on behalf of her party. Harris commented on yesterday's Supreme Court confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh and implored Democrats to take back the power.
What we saw, and many of us became very dispirited over the last couple days and weeks. Let's deal with that, right? Because what we saw was an exercise of raw power. Raw power, which was used and had the effect of demeaning and diminishing and belittling people. Well, here's the thing. If we want to correct the course, what do we need to do? We need to take the power. That means we need to maximize the power of the people. The power of the people. And how do we do that? We vote.
And with that, let's bring in NBC News national political reporter Mike Memoli. Sorry, Mike, we don't have the, you're not talking about the memo today, so, but you still put the memo,
Not
Memoli.
the memo, no.
What are you seeing in Ohio?
Well, Casey, of course, the Supreme Court confirmation process just wrapping up here is really on the minds of everybody at this Ohio State Party dinner that Senator Kamala Harris spoke to tonight. It's 30 days until the midterm elections, but 31 days until we can really dive into the 2020 race. We had a chance to talk to Senator Harris earlier today. She did say she's really focused on 18. That's why she was at this dinner tonight. And her role in those Senate confirmation process was really something that we heard from the litany of speakers here from every statewide office. she's one of the people who really emerges with her stature enhanced. But what we also heard from a lot of the speakers tonight is concern that the Supreme Court confirmation process may have helped energize Republicans in a way that they hadn't been previously. Senator Kamala Harris, obviously front and center in this process, she talked about the fact that there's still perhaps more to say, more to hear about what involving Judge Kavanaugh. Here's what she had to say to the Democrats in the room here tonight.
Truth is like the sun. It always comes up in the morning. And on these issues that were presented during those hearings, I believe the truth will eventually reveal itself.
One of the important things that Senator Harris is doing here, not just filling a room, I promise you this room was very full just about an hour ago, but also helping some of those red state Democrats who are going to be facing even tougher races perhaps because of their vote against Judge Kavanaugh. As you know well, Casey, you reported some of this as well. Senator Donnelly and Senator Heitkamp. Senator Harris sent her, used her fundraising list to try to raise money for those candidates, praising them for their courage on that vote and saying that they need all the help that they can get now.
Mike, thank you so much. And yes, that's right. Kamala Harris's campaign folks apparently raising $400,000 for Senator Heitkamp in just 24 hours. Maria Teresa Kumar, since you're our sort of resident Democrat here tonight, what's your take on Senator Harris's role in this primary process? How do you think she sort of stacks up against the emerging field?
Well, I think she's been really impressive, and she wouldn't be the very first-term senator to decide to run for the highest office of the land. What's interesting, though, is who she's endorsing. In August, she endorsed the Democratic Iowa Secretary of State. She now is saying that she's going to be in Iowa later on this month, right after, right before the midterms. So she's doing all the right things, but she's also bringing in some of the more conservative Democrats. You mentioned Heidi Heitkamp, but there's a few others, and so she's basically trying to demonstrate that she's a lawyer, she's a prosecuting attorney first, that she's tough, and that she is definitely weighing her options. But it's the map that I would encourage people to look at. Where is she visiting? Who is she visiting for?